thank you all for hanging around. This is our final panel, which is our creative panel, which is designed to look at the creative process and how you move something from an idea to a reality, how you go about executing it. So I have a very distinguished panel here with Reed, Sean, Dan, and Lise. And we will move the screen up maybe. But we will start with Reed, who's temporarily blind.
Slouch.
You just give a quick introduction about yourselves, and then we'll jump into it.
Sure. My name is Reed Kaufmann. I went to school at Ohio University. I graduated about 3 years ago. I don't know what year that actually is, but since that time, I've been working with Fresh Games. Had a little booth here today, and Steve Smith, who was a presenter earlier today as well. I work as a designer and producer there at Fresh Games, and I've work on iOS games. We've done a couple over the course of the past few years, and I've been designer and producer on those.
Cool.
My name is Sean. My name is Sean Beeson, and I'm a media composer. I graduated from Capital University in 2007. I primarily score games. I've scored over 60 iOS games and a handful of console titles, but I also do work with local groups like Ballet Met. I had a ballet that premiered with them last year, and I work with some of the local companies here like Sidebolt and trying to think of the other one, Space Junk, if anyone's familiar with Space Junk.
You also did some of the music for our expo here.
Yes. Nice. You've been hearing my music for the most part all day today.
Nice.
Right. Now it's in your heads.
Dan?
I'm Dan Rockwell. I run the Software Prototyping Center at Ohio State, which is essentially the commercialization arm for the university. I also do Big Kitty Labs, which is a rapid prototyping company to help startups make their software fast. My background is mostly user experience design, although I did about 7 years in Japanese animation, so I got a love for games in that space. It's just great to be here.
I'm Lise Worthen-Chaudhari. The games that I design are movement games. They're designed to help people who've had a brain or spinal cord injury to recover by moving. There are paradigms in which the movement is the medicine. So they use a game and it doesn't hurt so bad. It's not so boring. Not that therapy is boring, sorry. So my terminal degree is in dance. I'm the first person with an MFA that the Ohio State Medical Center has hired on as research faculty. We actually think I'm the first person with an MFA that any medical center has hired on as a faculty member. Yeah. I have funding from several big sources, including an NIH grant with Jane McGonigal. Yeah.
All right.
And I've been a scientific advisor for Jane for several years.
All right. So I've got a lot of big questions here. Some of these have been given to me by various people, but we're going to start with one that I think is going to be really interesting since we have such a diverse group on the panel. But what is your idea of success in your projects, and what's your ultimate goal? So I'm going to start with Lise because you're sort of a little out of the box compared to perhaps the rest of our guests here. So.
Success for me is seeing joy on a patient's face. They come in thinking, I can't, and they leave thinking I can.
I think success for me on the projects I work with, or the people that I work with on projects, is a sense of momentum. So there's a sense of we're not stuck, the thing is continuing to move. You may be completely screwing up along the way, but we haven't stopped making decisions. And when you have that sense of speed and momentum, it keeps everyone alive and keeps going.
Success for me is to just enjoy what I do. Since I work by myself, I don't really work around other people, and I work remotely. It's really important for me to just enjoy what I'm doing, and if I tend to enjoy it, it feels successful.
I like to echo what Lise said. The joy, or how I define success for myself as a game designer, when individuals come back and they enjoy the product that you put out there because you've put a fair amount of effort into creating a product that can be enjoyed, and see that it actually has been and that people do enjoy it and they're having a good time with it. That's like, yes, I did a good job. And so that's success.
Sweet.
So, Dan, you touched on something pretty interesting, which is momentum and the sense of progression,
Yep.
which has been talked about in some of the previous by some of the previous speakers. That everything's all good when you've got that sense of momentum, but then sometimes you kind of hit that wall and you're not sure if you're making progress or you're going in the right direction. How do you and what you do sort of go about fixing that or getting things back on the right track, or even identifying it sometimes? That
Yeah,
you've lost it?
I think the other thing you might have heard here is that you need to have another person, right? You need another person to keep yourself in check, which is really huge. Because if it's just you, you can be totally delusional, like in a closet, going like it's fine, right? But you're lost. So you need another person to help keep yourself in check. And because we work in startups and a lot intellectual IP, and we always have to remind our inventors and the people we work with that there's another 9 million people competing with you to get to the prize that you're trying to go after. So you've got to make decisions to keep going. You constantly have to sort of check yourself. So look at time. You know, like, for example, at Startup Weekend, we'd like to talk about build something in 120 days. That's your goal. 120 days, $3,000, hit. And then it's like, challenge yourself. And the last point that was a big theme for Startup Weekend too is I think everyone wants to be Roy Hobbs. Everybody wants to be the natural, hit the massive home run. What you need is a couple base hits, real simple things that reinforce the fact that you can do it, and you work your way up in it. So I guess that's a response.
So, Sean, you talked about, just to counter what Dan said, you work predominantly remotely. So how do you keep your own sense of progression moving? How do you, Steve Castro mentioned, like when you're working on your own, it's your own business, like you have to stay focused. Like, how do you go about doing that?
I think my wife and children probably help a lot with that to keep me focused on, sometimes you kind of get distracted, and especially when you work by yourself in a remote building and, you've got a PlayStation 4 or whatever in the next room that you can kind of just hop over and play. But, I think about my wife and kids, and they expect to have time with me. And as it was previously said, you have to spread your time and give time to them. And so that helps me to really stay focused and driven to kind of meet the goals that I need to meet and stay on target.
All right. So sort of in segueing that, and this is for whoever wants to jump in, keeping that momentum, staying focused, what's some good processes to start out on? Like when you're beginning a project, or even if you're in a project, like what are some good ways to make sure you're being efficient, you're staying focused, and if you get off track, getting back on track? This is for whoever wants to jump in.
Milestones, I think, first and foremost, is separating any product that you do. It's going to be a multi-step entity, and so understanding what those steps are going to be, what you need to accomplish first, and then what's going to have to come after that is going to be the first thing that you need in order to keep going on things, but giving yourself enough leeway to be able to move things around. Because we were talking about with momentum, sometimes you just get stuck on something. If you can, it's not called writer's block in game design, but if you call it designer's block, I guess, you just reach a point and it's, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. No really good solution. And so sometimes it takes time. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night with a cold sweat. I got it.
Yeah.
But most of the time, it's just working with something else will eventually get the ball moving on that stuck point. So keeping milestones that are, working down the same path so that you're always headed towards your goal. And if you get stuck, you can shift gears and not lose track of where you were.
Yeah, I would add to that, those milestones for me, they're sort of these reality checkpoints, and there's a lot of iteration that happens, and then I kind of step back and I'm like, okay, what do we got? And you have to be going into that ready to throw it out if it's not meeting the goal. Like you have to go back to your original, what was the original design goal? But don't wait 3 months to throw out the work. You're like, iterate,
Yeah.
Check in, do those reality checks a little bit like weekly or every other week or something.
I like to keep it physical. Like I have a wall in my house where I'm just a perpetual scribbler. Like I write down every question.
You are perpetual.
Yeah, you
I am a
You
perpetual
certainly
scribbler.
are.
I'm surprised.
But I know I should be scribbling. But I actually like to take Post-its and a Sharpie and okay, I'm going to jump in the role of the naysayer, write down all the problems with this concept, all the mechanics and all the assumptions I'm throwing on the table. Now I'm going to jump in the role of what I think the actual experience is. Now I'm going to bring in somebody who's brand new, like my wife's friend, comes in, looks at the idea, she says, this idea is stupid as hell. I'm like, sweet, write down all those problems that you have with it, and just get it out of your head and on the wall, so that you don't get stuck in your own theory craft. I think that's a danger point for anyone trying to build something. You fall into that trap where you have all those assumptions.
Also, if you feel yourself falling into that trap, sleep.
Yeah.
Take a nap. It'll sort itself out.
Do something completely different.
Yeah.
That's another thing.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, particularly for game developers. When you're testing stuff and you have things in front of people, listen to what they're saying, because they're gonna provide things that you never thought of as feedback. And maybe it's worthwhile, maybe it's not, but it's something other than your opinion going into a project. Which I'll sort of segue into playtesters. Like, when do you guys get something in front of an audience to make it worthwhile, to make sure that feedback is worth the effort? Because there's certain times where it may or may not be ready sort of for prime time, as they say.
Well, we did Escape the Titanic, and it was a puzzle-based game, and there were approximately 43 puzzles-ish. And we knew early on that because of its puzzly nature, it's very subjective. What's hard for me, and the fact that all the puzzles were different, no two were alike. Each one was going to be a new thing, math puzzles, action puzzles, so on and so forth. We knew that it was going to be different for everybody. And so for no two people were going to have the same skill level at it. So we realized early on in the project that it was going to be important to have people testing it early on. So we created milestones, not based upon general goals, but we segmented the game out into three sections. Three sections. And when we got done with that section, then we took that chunk, 15 puzzles, not done completely, but mechanically sound, and we put them in front of people, and we said, how hard are these? And they said, I can't get past these, they suck so bad. And we said, okay, wow, I didn't think they were that hard. But by the guy designing it, of course it's not that hard, because you made the puzzle.
Right.
And so we took that feedback, and while we were working on our second group of puzzles, we were adjusting our first group of puzzles, and we continued to do that with each section. And in that case, the player feedback early on was extremely important because it allowed us to keep our flow done. So by the time we got to the third section of puzzles, we had that first section good. It was clean. It was crisp and clear and ready to go. And so that we worked progressively through that on each step. In other games, sometimes you need to wait a little bit longer, but player feedback is crucial when it's crucial, if that makes any sense. No, it doesn't. There are those junctures that you define at the beginning of a project where, especially around the milestones, where you feel like functionality is coming to a headway. That's when player feedback, because that'll give you that good, does this even work? I mean, is this even understandable from people?
It's just fun for someone other than me.
Yes, yeah.
I know so outside, so I don't do a ton of games, mostly just software app development. Sometimes you need to create enough of the concept so the user can get it. And a lot of times you don't want to show them the finished thing, because I always feel like there's like the worst kind of feedback is someone going like, yeah, like, okay, crap, I'd rather have you insult. I mean, when they get mad at me, that's great content because they tell me what's wrong. Or they give me content like change the font size or color size, which is crap to me. I want data that's actually can help me go in a real right direction. So a lot of times I like them there early, but only if they can actually get the base concept. Like you can't, if you're doing a Pirates game and you show somebody like a sword in the water, and you know it's a Pirates game, but they're like, I don't know what to do here. You're like, damn, that's just a dumb user. No, you didn't give them enough context. So you got to lay down enough context so they can get it.
And as a contractor, this is kind of related. I wish that developers would bring me in earlier.
Absolutely.
If I was an artist, they'd bring me in right away. But since I'm a musician, they usually bring me in at the end. And they have all of these notions of what they want with the music. But by the end, they tend to not have the budget or the time. And so it's like, if you'd brought me in 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago, I could have said, well, if this is what you want, you're going to need either more money or lower expectations, or let's adjust your expectations. And so it's related to the question that I wish as a contractor that I'd be brought in earlier with developers so that I can help make the important audio decisions instead of kind of just being.
Not only that, but you can make a whole ensemble. You can go, you want the theme song, I can also do all the sound effects, and I can do all the prep. So you can make it all cohesive for the user, and if they involved you earlier. I think a lot of times we don't, and like you see this in design and user experience stuff too, people often say, I want to build an app, and then they're like, oh yeah, I'll figure out design later. Like, whoa. So you're gonna flush, 25K here, and then you're gonna rebuild it when the experience sucks, but the base technology works. So you see that a lot in software development.
And we use a design first process. I use a design first process, but because I'm trying to design for people who, like specifically for them to move in ways that I can't move. Like I can't move the way a stroke person moves or the way a spinal cord injured person moves. I have to bring people in sooner. So that means that I have to have barely working prototypes. So like really, I call them my little haiku prototypes. Right? It's just like the simplest proof of concept of this one part of something, and test the heck out of it. So I'm constantly doing design, bring people in, the end user in for design, bringing everybody else in for design, before then going out to like, okay, is this feasible in the clinical workflow? Okay, is it efficacious? So early and often, bring people in.
Early and often.
Early enough.
All right, sold. So I'm going to ask a question about tools. We talked about that a little bit when Jeremy Patterson was giving his conversation, and just about how tools, new technologies have changed your work process and what you're attempting to accomplish. So Fresh Games focuses a lot on mobile games and mobile development, which is something that didn't exist 6 years ago. Lise, you've been functioning with the Kinect a lot, which is a relatively new technology. So if you could go into a little bit about like what your overall goals are and how these new tools impact, hinder, help what you've been working on, or maybe they just change the game altogether.
For iOS development, I know some of the tools that have become extremely useful for us is the ability to very quickly prototype things and have base functionality understood very early on and create a workflow so that we can, everybody in the office has an iPod or an iPhone or whatever iDevice they currently have, and then we get a build out, and then as soon as that build is done, everybody in the office has it and they can go and play it immediately. And so, for instance, we work with a lot of outside developers, and they all have the same, device to play off of. They can pump it out. We can move that and see it very quickly. At the same time, we can, for Android, and for instance, not so much iOS, but for Android, we can do an update, and we can have that update out to everyone in 2 hours. There was a bug with the game. We found out that bug today. Didn't see it before, it slipped through the fingers. Okay, let's fix it, and it goes out this afternoon so that nobody else has a problem with that issue. And that speed of development and that turnover rate in getting product to all individuals that require it is one of the best things about working with iOS, and helpful with testing products as they're moving along the development cycle.
I can speak to the new tools in terms of like the technology Kinect. The user interface is becoming more and more natural, more and more like it's like you're walking down the street or breathing. You just do it, right? You don't have to strap anything on. You don't have to, there's no setup. That actually dramatically transforms what I do, because especially for the patients that I work with who are brain injured versus spinal cord injured, cognitive overhead is really a problem. A lot of times you're brain injured, like your brain doesn't work the way you want it to anymore, right? You have trouble thinking. So the more of a glide path I can have, the minimum amount of setup, so they just walk into space and they start moving and they start recovering. That's the ideal, and that's really where this natural user interface stuff is going, with the Kinect being an example of that.
So one of the other things that gets talked about a lot, and I'll say misconstrued, but I don't know if that's the appropriate word, but the value of ideas. So obviously everybody likes to think their idea is the greatest, and they put it down, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But when you're creating something and you're trying to value something, like how do you even go about doing that in your respective areas? Like how do you know how powerful an idea is or how valuable an idea is? We talked a little bit about player testing, but there's other mechanisms that you guys might be able to dig into a little bit.
It's a tricky one.
I asked Dan what he thinks, and he tells me if it's crap or not.
I think a lot of it's how. A lot depends on the person who has the idea, right? And how, at least in my world, it's how coachable is the person who has the idea. Because they might have a great idea, but if I can't enable them through all the resources that we have to try to move them to the next milestone, and from a venture capital standpoint, they won't waste their time. They invest in people who can be coachable, period. Because you're not going to invest, you're not going to put $100,000 in an asset that can't move the ball forward, right? So idea is important, but the team is hugely important. So I think that who that person is and moving it forward is key. But I struggle with ideas because I think ideas are the muse. Like, that's the reason why you're there. That's the reason why you're the only one on the bus that was like, oh my God, that's hilarious. And people stare at you like you're an idiot, but you just realize the big thing, and that's magic. You know what I mean? So, but execution matters more.
Yeah.
So you got to focus on that execution part. So it's a balance.
I think for me, the two biggest things that affect whether or not I deem an idea good are time and other individuals. Time is huge. I have a huge list of ideas. I'm constantly coming up with ideas. I have pages and pages and pages of them. And at the time, it's always like, yeah, that's really awesome. That's going to be great. But there's a difference between the wouldn't it be cool if we could do this type of ideas. And the thing that helps me sort between those, usually, if I come back, because, even if you have an idea right now for some other game in the future, you're probably not going to move on it right away. It'll take you at least a couple weeks, few weeks to get going on things. So I'll get an idea, everything that comes into my brain gets written down somewhere. Then every couple weeks I'll come back and I'll look at that list. And I'll go to myself, man, that's stupid. What was I thinking? And I'll just, that was dumb, that was stupid. And then out of the myriad of different ideas, there will be a few in there that I go, that still has merit. That idea still functions. And those are the ones that I find that still work, even after the initial adrenaline-fueled exhilaration of coming up with something. The ones where after the real world has set in, I go, okay, that would still work in this scenario. Those are the ones that I usually try to at least experiment with further. I don't ever go, oh, this is great. I run to my boss. We've got to do this right now. And that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I think that it's tricky because we're on that theme of you gotta fail, right? You have to learn how to accept failure, and it's like, wait, man, I don't really want to stand at the top of the stairs and fall down, because a lot of times, especially in
Put your helmet on, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's going to happen. But I think, and I tell that to people like at Startup Weekend and stuff, is that I can't save you from the car accident that you're going to get when you're building your business. You're going to hit it. And, a lot of people will stop and they'll go back to corporate life and they're never going to keep making. But the people that keep making and get back up, they get their second idea after the experience of the first idea is everything to them. So then they never want to let go of that experience of having that really bad idea. Because I was like, that was a great idea, but it was really failure. Yeah, it was. But it led to the next big thing. So you can't do that, I guess. It's hard, especially if you're creative and you're persistent to make stuff. And all the game developers in this room, you guys know what that's like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Your ideas, your games in your head that you create, they're like little babies. You love them. Yeah. And that's why testing is hard too. That's why that is hard, because you don't want somebody coming around here and making fun of your child. How dare you? This thing is amazing. Don't do that.
As a mother of two, be ready to kill your children.
Yeah.
It's fine.
And you're right. You have to go, okay, and we got to get rid of this guy. He's weird, and
It sounds painful what you guys go through.
yeah. So
what's your world like, Sean?
I mean, the value of my work is really just determined by the clients. They either like it or they hate it, and sometimes I write something that I think's amazing, and they're like, "This is great. Take the strings out." And you're like, "That's a clarinet," and they're like, "Yeah, take that out." And you just earlier in my career, you'd be like, "No," you'd try to push back, and then at a certain point, you're like, "You know what? If that's what Disney wants, that's what they get. Because if I'm not going to do that,
Right.
they're going to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you just gotta, it's not really like crashing the car or falling down the stairs quite as bad.
Yeah.
Because you just kind of have to
It's
say,
actually
okay.
a really good distinction. Like things that you do for other people, stop trying to control them. Just do what they tell you, right? And just
Yeah.
you can be creative within that structure. And then you always have your thing that you're doing on the side that's for you.
Yeah.
And I always tried to control it in the beginning, and it causes more tension.
Sure.
And then as
just,
I
like,
matured,
take
I
the-
realized, it's so much easier and less stressful to just treat it almost as if it's a trade skill when
That's
you're a
it.
composer. You just go and do the job. You make it sound good. Sometimes if they're like, take the strings out when you send a final version, you can kind of put the strings back in a little bit.
Yeah.
To
won't
make
know
it
we're
where you
we
think
do
it's
that,
going to be good. And sometimes you get caught. Sometimes you don't. But
Well, it's like that in software development. I know at Big Kitty, when I would tell people people say, "What do you hate most about your doing this gig?" I says, "I hate it when I care more about the startup than the startup does. Like when my client doesn't care about the product as much as I do, I'm emotionally compromised and I need to get beaten up on the bridge and like take off, whatever. Because I do. I'm like I care more about this product that I get stuck to. And I think that's just if you're a maker. We're makers. You want to see things go, and so you gotta. It's hard to separate yourself. I envy you. I'll take your classes so I could learn how to separate myself more often. Because it's an important skill to have.
That's really interesting. So let's jump ship a little bit. We've been talking a lot about barriers and things like that, but ideas are awesome. I mean, having really good ideas is cool, and like turning them into something that you can show. I mean, we have a lot of booths. Lise has a booth. We have a booth. Fresh Games had a booth. Dan did not have a booth.
I don't know. Sorry.
We're here at Sean's Music, so that's like a booth. But anyway, you get to like create something and show it to other people, and that's real awesome. Particularly when you get the positive feedback. You mentioned like sometimes you just get feedback that's not particularly useful or like whatever. But at least at the end of the day, you've created something really cool. So I want our guests here at the end of the day, when they leave, to know that like my idea can be turned into something really valuable, and that they have a good sort of pipeline on how to do that. So we've talked about goal setting previous to this. We've talked about play testing. But is there any other parts that we're kind of missing in this process from your own perspective or just in general, where they could walk out this door tonight and get started, and maybe we can't save them from falling down the stairs, but we can avoid them bumping into the wall,
I would say MVP is a big thing that we discuss, and that is minimum viable product, as in because there's another term that goes right along with MVP, but it's like the yin and the yang. It's called feature creep. So those two things, they sit counter to each other. And as a designer, it's important that you know what your minimum viable product is. What is the least I could put out into the world at large, whatever that world might be, and have people like it, with or without strings, And people will enjoy this, and they'll play it, and they'll have a good time. Understand what that is, that part, and then understand that everything else is fluff, and then working from that route, and then moving forward with that. That'll help streamline an idea very quickly, or kill it off. If your game doesn't work without 50 different little add-ons and meta games attached to it, then there's probably something wrong with the idea at its heart. So understanding what that base, the visceral concept is that's going to grasp a person and pull them in, and then just building that's going to help refine an idea and move it forward along a path that will get it created, and then avoid feature creep.
I totally second that on the MVP. It's everything I do in that space. The other space I really like that I don't think we do enough of is think about what the game or software can collect. So think about what data, or how can you learn about your users, what you've created. And you could start with the basic of, I know how many impressions they were on this page, or I know how much time they spent on this puzzle, or You know, I know they never went to this section of the app. Think about the analytics of what you've created, and think about the new stories you can tell with that. Because oftentimes with investors, when you can present, there's you know, the sense of momentum with this project. As users use this, I get more and more understanding. I have this new asset that grows along with the momentum of the game itself. That's a real powerful thing. And I think any early thinking you can do on that is huge, in my opinion. When one of the games that Big Kitty did many years ago was a Twitter following game. It was actually a Twitter dumping game. You would dump your friends on Twitter and you'd get points. The notion was that we were following too many people on Twitter that are stupid. So we did analytics on those
Dude,
users.
did you dump me?
Yeah, well, you don't tweet much. Anyways, what was really interesting is we built this analytics piece that would tell us about those users. And we got tons of qualitative data about why people followed people, which is a really cool asset. And we were able to turn that into stories, and people gave us, you know, like more attention and interest because we created this world and things happened in this world, and we were able to learn from that. So I think that's kind of cool when you can do that in a game.
Are there any music people in the audience? Okay, we got some. All right. I just want to make sure I'm not talking to no one. Music people, just diversify. I mean, that's the best thing that you can do. Some of the music that you heard here today that was maybe used for parts of the promotions was actually rejected Disney music.
Nice.
Yes. All of my rejected Disney music, I've been able to resell with 100% success.
Nice.
So even though they hate it, if you have other networks, you know, it's not that there was anything wrong with the music. They just changed their Finding Nemo video to something completely different, and so the music didn't work. And so if you can diversify yourself and make sure that in your own contracts with smaller companies that you can retain control of your own music, and that you can have the ability to license it in the future or take advantage of your own rights to your music, that'll help you from signing away your music and then kind of hating yourself for it 3 years later. So
I'll just piggyback on the arts kind of approach. Improvisation, so you could do jazz improvisation or, you know, different musical instruments. Well, dance does improvisation too. Nobody ever goes to watch dance, so probably none of you have seen that before, but that's all right. So I would say practicing improvisation. So you have your goal, sure, but you kind of got to improvise within that, and through that you gain mastery of ideas, and you end up developing proof of concepts for things that you can come back to later, so it's like just always benefits. The other thing is, if you're working in a team, don't get ticked off at each other. It's not personal, it never is. Agree to disagree, and persevere.
Yeah, the team thing is like a whole other talk, but
Yeah.
It's your time. You want to talk about teams? We can talk about teams.
What do you guys want us to talk about?
Yeah, and we can jump to questions
talk
too.
about, yeah.
I think we get some amount of time. So yeah, let's.
some say music.
Yeah, I don't know where I can't see anything.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Charles.
Okay, this is specifically for Sean. I'm a game programmer, but I also very much enjoy composing. And whenever I have a project or something that I work on, I like to put my music in it. And working with sound in games is something that I could see doing like seriously. And you're probably like the first person I've met who does music for games. And I just wanted to ask you how like composing just music, or how composing music for games is different than just composing music that's just simply music.
The real answer is different than the answer that a lot of people give. A lot of people will say, well, it's different because it's interactive and it's dynamic and it's got to sound gamey and it's got to, games can't sound like Hollywood. And the truth is the process is really kind of the same. And to film directors, I'm Sean Beeson, composer for film. And for people that develop games, I'm Sean Beeson, game composer. And on my website, I'm Composer for Media. I mean, the process, the tools that you use, the middleware, the way that you interact with the client is different. As I'm sure you know, when you work with games, sometimes you do have to create interactive or dynamic music. And the way that you prepare your music and the way that you'll approach writing it is different. But the tools that I use, whether it's a film or game or an amusement park ride, it's the same. And the process of brainstorming and coming up with creative ideas is the same. The difference is just knowing what the end result's going to be. And if it's a game that needs to have dynamic music, then I know I need to go through certain steps. But again, I write orchestral music. So orchestral music, whether it's games or film or musical theater, tend to share somewhat common ties versus someone that might just do chiptunes. I mean, that's a completely different sound that you're not really going to find so much in films. And so the process of doing music like that is completely different than doing something in films. I mean, I know that's kind of a very vague answer, but
I'm sure depending on like the project you're on, it's really different, like what the person you're working for is wanting.
Yeah, and I've written music for like the ballet that I did. Some of the music that was in that was actually from video games, and it adapted to ballet perfectly. And music that I've written for films, we've used in games and have made the pieces dynamic, just going back and tweaking things in the music. And so we like to say that it's different, but my personal opinion is it's not really all that much different, and I'm sure there's lots of people that disagree with me, but what I do really isn't that much different. But I tend to write very cinematic sounding music to begin with. So,
Thanks.
We got a couple.
So what you said earlier about being really more attached to the product than the startup you're working for, really resonated with me, and I feel like it describes a large portion of my career. I was wondering if any of you could sort of talk about the strategies you use to detach when the person making the decisions is not the person crafting the product. Because I don't want to be the person making the decisions. I want to make the stuff, but they also make a lot of dumb decisions. So I'm curious sort of what your strategies are.
It's hard.
That's really hard.
I have my big list for like the company these are all the game ideas I give to you, and then I have like my own little list on the side here. And when I'm churning through these things and presenting them, and first and foremost is to recognize that not every idea is stellar. Most of them are junk. But every once in a while, one of those ones that I'm like, that was actually really good. And they're like, no, that sucks. And I'm like, I really still think it's really good. They're like, no, it's bad. I'm like, I really think this is, okay, fine. You're going over in this pile. And I just hold those on the side there. And that, for me, that helps me. This thing turn off?
No, you're still on.
The idea of being able to hold on to some of those ideas and some of those concepts helps me from thinking that they're going to just die in the water, even though they probably will never come to anything. Just maintaining them and keeping my own dialogue, and maybe on my free time developing them a little bit, spending some time with them, keeps that illusion alive. And so that, we were talking about detachment from stuff. Doing that for me helps me when I go into a meeting or something and I have, whatever the concept is, and they go, that sucks. I go, okay, fine.
Yeah, I think for me it's a dance of it's kind of like the art of influencing people. It's kind of what you fall into, and I think you always have to reiterate the end goal. You have to find out if we're stuck in the middle of a massive feature creep, which was rampant everywhere. So you got to figure out where you are, and then sometimes you have to kind of be like, even though you know the answers, you know the answer is ABC, you're going to hold back C. You know it's C, but you know that if they come up with C, they'll have buy-in with you and feel like it's social engineering, believe it or not. You're gaming with the team to get things done. That's really what you're going to do. And I see this really often with venture capital and startups. A lot of times the venture capitalists if they don't like you, you don't get the money. And you need the money to live, right? So you want to appear coachable, even though you know that you're way smarter than the person who's giving you the money, or at least you think you are. But right now, the goal for the next 15 minutes is to get this person to basically see your vision and see the amazing things you're going to do and appear coachable. So you're going to hold back some data, let them reveal the data, and then you're like, dude, this is why we'd be a great team. And then they write you the check, and then you leave. Right? So I mean, it's like you got to work on that piece. So I think the social, and I think what's cool about games is that, especially this has really been an enlightening conference for me, because everything that they've talked about today is the same thing in the startup world, business startups. It's just a completely different audience. Yeah. But what I think is interesting is that you guys all specialize in exploiting basically humans' weakness, right? You're going to make things addictive. You're going to make things like, you're going to get me sucked into like mining gold for 7 hours straight to get some metric because there's a gold sink on there, and so I can get the glowy gem thing. That means crap, but I get addicted
That's
to it.
such a gamification attitude, man. That's
Yeah.
what games are about. No, games are design.
Smart.
Don't design games like that.
But it's that same thing exists in a team and exists in a business. It's like how to make it, how to make money in your sleep. That's what you guys are working on. So I think it's kind of cool.
I needed all those tomes of blacksmithing to.
Yeah, exactly.
I get a mental image of windows, and when something's just not going well, I like impose that mental image on myself, and I say that window is shutting. What are the windows that are still open? Jump through it. That's how I deal with it. Oh, and also a bottle of Pinot Noir.
Yeah. All right. I like that. Drinking and
Jumping through.
I think drinking and game design go hand in hand, as it does with most other artistic forms. Do we have any other questions?
Check. All right. I just want to say I'm noticing a trend that a lot of us creative types need somebody to reel us in. And as Sean stated, that's his wife and kids. And it's funny because as we're watching all these talks, my girlfriend keeps turning to me and going, "That's so us."
Yes.
Because I'm kind of a spaceman. So I am a very frustrated game composer. I've actually spoken to Sean online once before about this. I go to the Dana School of Music in Youngstown.
Okay.
I think we had to talk. This is really a question of monetization. I've scored maybe like 6 games that have never actually been released, and each one I keep taking smaller and smaller jobs. The first one was an RPG with like 46 tracks needed, and now I'm finding things that are like, we need 5 pieces of minute-long music. You do them, like if it'll be released, sure. But how much of your income as a successful composer is gaming? Is any of it like ASCAP, like grants? Is it commissions for live music? And also, as a game designer, how do you go out finding composers, or how do you go about being found?
Okay, yeah, I'll start. I'd say less than 5% of my income's from commissions. I get a lot of commissions, but they unfortunately tend to not pay very well unless they're backed by some kind of an arts grant. Or it's something like Ballet Met, where they plan on selling tickets out for 7 nights, which they have no problem doing. ASCAP and BMI is very little. I do a lot of television and theatrical trailer stuff, but when you're working with Disney, they tend to buy out because they don't want to have to deal with you coming back or with you ever having any claims against the music. So they just buy the rights to your music, which is not always a great thing, but with Disney, you kind of take what they put on the table or you walk. You can't really negotiate with them. I've tried. It doesn't work. A lot of my income really is just work for hire. And so I've tried to do the back-end royalty thing on iOS titles. I've scored probably close to 80 iOS titles now. I've done games. I've had at least 5 or 6 titles that have been in the top 10 in the App Store. And the issue is that the people that are making the good games tend to know that they're making the good games, and they do not want to give you any back ends. on it, and they tend to pay better upfront money. And I try to negotiate royalties, residuals on that stuff, and more often than not, they decline it, or they offer such a low percentage that it's just, unless the game does really well, unless it's the next Tiny Wings or Fruit Ninja, it just isn't worth it. You're better off getting the money up front instead of taking the risk.
Yeah.
And with smaller developers that want to offer you back ends, I say go for it, but make sure that there's a clause in your contract that if the game isn't completed, that you're owed at least a minimum amount of money, because you've put your hours in. So if nothing else, they at least need to compensate you for your hours and return the rights to your music to you. And I've worked with developers that try to say, we'll give you back ends only, and here's the contract, you're signing the rights over to us. No way. That makes no sense. If you haven't paid me, you don't get the rights to the music, or the licenses to use the music. So if nothing else, make sure that they're at least paying you for your time if the game's not released, or if you're not being paid at least a certain percentage of what you think you should have made, that they have to pay you that minimum. And that at least protects your time investment. And a lot of developers, they think, oh yeah, my game's gonna do that well. So they'll go for that. And they should pay you for your time. If you're writing 40 minutes of music, you're spending a month of your life. And they should pay, I'm not saying they should pay you tens of thousands of dollars, but at least pay you for the, that 200 hours that you've invested into it. And then worst case, you walk away with a little money and all of your music that you can then turn around and sell
to Chris for the next Expo.
Yeah.
Do it. Sean was generous enough to donate his music accounts to us. So.
He's going to cut your royalty check later. But.
Yeah.
I'd say on the developer side, I'm always scrounging for music. So I always try to go to the places that music is freely available to get. And then we buy the different pieces of equipment like Native Instruments, machine, and their whole complete system, and try to mix stuff, just because we're always in a perpetual prototype stage. We're not, we don't feel like we haven't, I would say I don't have anything like ready for Sean yet, so I want to experiment first. But I would say that the composer, when the composer gives you music, I think that developers, we often see that as we just need to plug in this space. We need some background design or whatnot, not realizing that the music itself actually inspires design. So I think that's something that is hugely critical in what he said, that his time is valuable. Same thing for you. Your time is valuable. You got to bill for it. You probably got to go more for the work for hire type space, where people can recognize your talent, not just the WAV file you're going to give them.
And that's why I like when developers come early, just because then I can, I have 1,000 tracks of music that I've written in the last 10 years. I can say, here's 1,000 tracks. Here's 30 that might fit what you want. Put that in your game. So you're listening to my music for 6 months. So when I write a track, you're like, this is perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. Versus when you're listening to somebody else's music for 6 months and then I have to try to rip it off.
Now, do you build sound packs to target the developing community? Because that would be the next place to go. It seems like.
I build music libraries to target trailers. And that's just because the game industry on that front is just the bottom of it's really falling out. I mean, there's people that are like, take my music for $2. It's like, I just cannot compete with that. I'm going to hire you for $2. So I can just sit back and do nothing and subcontract it all out for $2.
Well, just buy it all, work for hire for $2. I'll do that.
Yeah, when we do sound design or music design for any of the games, usually it's in conjunction with the developer that we've contracted out. For us, it usually works better if the developer already knows a composer, so that they have a workflow with each other. And a lot of developers usually do have a composer or someone, they know a sound guy that they've worked with before. Well, if they know a sound guy that they've worked with before, and fine, use him, because I don't want to have to deal with trying to establish new flows of communication and new pipelines for transfer of information between people.
Yeah, you guys work with Somicon, right? Or did you work with some?
I don't know off the top of my head, but we work with a few of them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got time for one more question.
Hello. This question is for everyone. I'm just kind of wanting your feedback on this philosophy ideal that my friends and I use. I am predominantly a writer and a little bit of an artist, and I hang around with a lot of artists, music composers, and several of their game designers. And kind of our core mantra that keeps us going is that bad ideas are just good ideas that need a little more work, meaning that if you have an idea that isn't working right now, it might work down the line for another project, or it just is waiting for collaboration with the right person. And that just kind of keeps us from dwelling on ideas that aren't working. Would you agree with that practice, or is that something that you think is inhibiting further growth?
Tough question. I like it.
I agree. It's easy for me to answer. I mean, I think
It's easy. Yeah, same.
I'm not Beethoven, so everything I write, I realize it's not the best thing ever, and I've come to terms with that. And it still is good. It's good enough for 98% of the projects I work on, and I'm always going to strive to get better. But I'm someone that's very hypercritical of their own work, and if I continue to just always stress about my music, then I'd never get anything done. So I think it's every piece has potential, and sometimes it's not always perfect, but I guess I'm from the school of thought that maybe high volume of work will result in eventual creativity, and I think it all turns out okay.
Yeah, I think for me, I would agree with that. Just it's important to for me, it's forgive myself as soon as possible and keep going. So as long as but at the same time, you just don't want to just make a lot of things that don't necessarily add up. So try to figure out what the idea is trying to tell you. A lot of times, the first idea gives you like 25% of what happens in the next big idea, which then really hits. But what you don't want to do is I think this happens a lot with startups, is that, and you see a ton of divorce, you see a ton of people go broke, you see a lot of people, we're even seeing suicide happening, right? And like, this is crazy, we're killing ourselves for our creation. So you got to be the first one to forgive yourself and then just move on. But at the same time, make sure that you feel like you have a portfolio of stuff that you can actually show, not that you've just tried and tried and tried. So when I meet somebody and they've been working on a business plan for a year and a half, I said, great, we're going to kill that today. You got 120 days to come up with something brand new, and maybe I'll give you a constraint. You have to do this theme. Pick a constraint and make it go with it so that you can actually get something done. But I think your methodology is pretty sound to me.
Yeah, no bad ideas. I don't know. I've heard some bad ideas before. Just thinking back. But again, I have a yellow highlighter, and when I do my monthly recheck of everything that I've creatively come up with over the course of the past month, that also includes everything that I've come up with, for before that as well, that I've decided to hold on to. And I'll highlight things out that are bad and then go, okay, this doesn't work right now. But oftentimes, and I've seen this occur on a few occasions, is that revisiting those ideas, as I said, later, after the anxiety of the moment has passed, and revisiting it with a different mindset. Sometimes those ideas will still be bad ideas. Maybe they'll be better later. I don't know. But sometimes those ideas that I created up with were bad at the time will work in conjunction with what I'm working on right now, or in some cases even, they will work in conjunction with something that I saw previously that I did, that those two now harmonize together. And I can come up with a game design, a game mechanic, because that's mainly what I work around, are creating game mechanics that people enjoy. And so sometimes those will combine together to make something really special, and sometimes that little line of dialogue will just stay yellow highlighted forever and ever. So
what you're talking about reminds me, so I danced professionally in San Francisco before we moved out here. And in the companies, in general, dance companies, you do a lot of work to create what you end up creating. And you don't really, it is inhibiting to the creative process, I think, to put value on whether something that you tried was good or bad. I tend to not think that way, and the people that I've danced with and created games or whatever with, it just doesn't help. So instead, you really start to work with, I think, what everybody's really touching on. Oh, we tried that, it didn't work. We tried that lift, and oh, ha, 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 I fell on the ground, right? Not that it was bad, it just didn't work. I do think that it can be hard as an artist to just get over that and just, it didn't work, go. Didn't work, go. Didn't work, go. And take it really personally. I think I've talked about that a little bit already. So in short, I do agree with you that putting that value, good, bad, doesn't help anything. But I also think just keep going. Just fall on the floor, get back up, faster, fail faster.
And save your drawings that don't work. Put them online. I mean, it's all portfolio stuff, so it's all usable.
Actually, in storytelling, George R.R. Martin has written some really cool stuff about his process when he was starting out. So he's the guy that did Game of Thrones or whatever. Is that what it's called? It's Blockbuster. And what you're talking about, he talks about. So, just that.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.